Hello again, everyone. Today we have Sergey Vorsin in the studio, our chief programmer. As such, today is another discussion about complex topics, about graphics features. Last time we talked about deep changes in the graphics engine, and today about more practical things, namely, as I said, graphics features. What new things have we introduced compared to Great Battles? What does this bring to the game? And maybe we'll say something about what we plan. Or maybe we won't, because we love secrets. So, let's actually begin. And the first thing I'd like to talk about today, Sergey, is the new technology system for displaying large populated areas, that is, cities. And not only that, we use it for various populated areas now. So, about the technology
Yes,
of
tiled block technology. This is our internal name for it, tiled blocks. Those in the community who have done missions with us are probably familiar with how it was in Great Battles and in Rise of Flight. The cities were built on the assumption that the mission developer would manually place each of these city blocks. Each city block is a separate model, so this takes a lot of time. And most importantly, it is not very efficient for rendering graphics. It is performance expensive to draw.
So, the scene map developer was working on compiling a mosaic, like a real mosaic from these little elements, like triangles and squares.
Most importantly, not only was it like a mosaic, but also the fact that there had to be elements of this mosaic. To compose a complex city, it was necessary to prepare 3D models in advance that could be used. In this case, we went in the direction of the more common technology that is currently available. I mean, well, of course it is implemented differently everywhere, but for those who make maps, the technology of these so-called tiled blocks greatly simplifies the editing of maps because there is no need to do it separately anymore. Templates for cities. It is now enough to make some 3 to 4 tiles or 5 tiles, depending on the types of structures we need to create. And accordingly, since we already have a built-in polyshape editor, now we can create, roughly speaking, cities directly on the map. There might be some minor drawbacks concerning flexibility. That is, if we start drawing a city, then we can draw some areas with this brush. If we need to include some unique location, it still needs to be modeled, like cathedrals and so on are pointless to tile. But overall, it speeds up map creation and makes it easier to build cities and their internal infrastructure. So, and most importantly, it allows you to draw and render these houses, yes, urban houses, in very large quantities. In terms of performance, it's several times faster than the old technology, both in terms of saturation and rendering speed.
Yes,
well,
I'll
you'll
include
probably
screenshots,
show the screenshots
but in practice,
there.
the size limits for cities have essentially disappeared.
Well, yes, formally they are now gone, but there are still some minor restrictions. But overall, for the uninitiated, we have reduced those restrictions significantly. So now it's possible to significantly increase the polygon count of these cities by adding so-called props, which are various small
benches, lampposts,
posts, yes, streetlights, all this, yes. So the question is, by adding these prop objects, we increase the polygon count, and basically it can be increased infinitely, but eventually we run into FPS issues sooner or later, because basically the polygon count the GPU can handle is finite. Even though there are LODs, there is a theoretical limit.
Well, roughly speaking, the basic principle that the artists have to adhere to certain reasonable limits on poly count remains. It's just that they have a lot more options now.
And we need to understand that these new structures are not fundamentally more detailed than our old content. The content evolves.
Again, they applied PBR to them.
And the physical materials, all of that, yes. Again, by the way, in connection with all of this, there were small changes we made in the camera system so that, for example, the free camera could not fly into these houses. Because in some cases, it really ruins the situation for us.
Because it should be able to fly into tunnels. Yes,
yeah,
but about the tunnels,
I'm looking where we have tunnels.
We talked about
the
tunnels
tunnels,
last time, but we might as well go over them again.
Well, yes, but basically all of that, cities and tunnels and so much more, is part of the work that is specifically related to increasing detail on the ground. But tunnels are a special case in that you can drive through them, you can shoot into them, and theoretically, you can fly into these tunnels.
And see what's happening
And
inside.
so, what I said about the camera system is that it was necessary to modify this camera view so that it would behave correctly in the tunnel and underground, preventing the possibility of going out of bounds.
As for the tunnels, it may not be necessary or amusing to point out that the tunnel system, unlike before, is not just a portal standing, and you bumped into it, and that's it. A real working tunnel system we have now is a kind of analogy. Warhammer 40,000. There is a concept called the webway. It's a system of travel through the galaxy where, well, it's fantasy, of course, where you have some kind of warp space, and to move through it, you build these big tunnels. We have something like that here, in the void under the terrain, yes, but you actually don't ever see them.
But our tunnels are physical. You have to go through them. If something goes in, you have to go out or go through. So there is no teleportation, and that includes trains. So what's next? Well, with the cities and these massive urban areas, we had to do something we didn't have, which was city lighting. Of course, there's the question of blackout during the war, but we're talking about technology now, and it exists. It's now possible to have illuminated cities, and the lighting during a mission is dynamic, meaning it depends on the destruction. Theoretically, it could be tied to some events in the mission, but for now, we limited it to the destruction of these blocks. Obviously, no one is building a power grid there, so there are no functioning substations and power lines. But there are lights.
Yes, it disappears, so you do damage to the block, and it disappears. Yeah. As for the blackout, I would say this. During World War II, it would be strange, but during the Korean War, even if you look at our closest competitors, no one bothers with it, simply because everyone wants the night to look good. Just like that.
Well, to avoid having a black screen there, yes. But there is also this point that city lighting is part of the technology that is needed for airfields, for runway lighting. Because this is the stage where illuminated airfields really begin. And so, it's all one technology, you could say. Oh, and it's worth mentioning that this also includes the lighting of the tunnels. Yes, what interesting stuff do we have next?
It would be cool to say, since we're talking about cities, including the fact that it's now convenient for map creators and cartographers, so certain tools have been created for them, and now city creation. Previously, you collected a mosaic of these block models, and now you just put polygons where you polygonally outline the area where certain types of houses should be placed, and they are placed there. It's much more convenient. In the same spirit, resuming this talk about the tools, we started this topic in Great Battles. You can now use your hands. We now have editing brushes, and you can plant trees with a brush. So we went further in Korea? So what has been added to the editor?
We just recently added that.
So we went even further in Korea.
Well, yes. So what has been added to the editor? Well, it all has to do with map creation. Specifically the cities and everything. This is more about the map itself rather than the missions. Again, well, we did it, or rather, we added editing capabilities to the editor. So there were tools added to correct the serpentines on roads in the mountains. So if there are mountains on the map, all of this is now automatic, so you could more or less fix it with the way it is now.
Yes, it is an automated tool that will automatically level the surface of the
height map under the road
being built.
And there for our map makers, we also created tools for automatically outlining water surface contours to simplify this huge task.
By the way, it's a huge gain in terms of quality and speed of map making, especially as large as the Korea map is. Over there, I forgot, but I think it's 5,000 kilometers, the length of the coastline that we ended up with. I think so. A number like that, I think, is what Genya Isayev mentioned to me. Maybe I got it wrong, but it's either 2 or 5. In short, we would have had to trace everything by hand. But now the machine does it all in one go.
Well, not just one go, but yes, it greatly automates the process. Yes, the process of outlining coastlines, both sea and river. Because river lines are much longer than coastlines. Well, yes, actually, we can now edit almost everything in the editor. The height map is editable, various layout maps are editable, water maps are editable, and whatever else. Again, the roads, the polylines themselves, and the texturing system, all of this. the texturing system has been upgraded to now allow for animated sequences.
Ah, yes,
Animated
yes,
textured
yes,
terrain.
animated textures.
Because there are going to be dams in Korea, and they have to animate the flow of those dams and mountain rivers. Yes, and mountain rivers. So in terms of the engine, if we go back, we already mentioned in that earlier episode that the reflection system has been reworked. This is because there are a lot of mountain rivers and a lot of elevation changes. It's like solving the problems 200%, which of course didn't happen, but it significantly improved the quality of the display of those reflections and the water surface.
Yes, many of you may remember that in great battles there was such a limitation, like when there are certain surface irregularities like the reflection of the water surface in a river or lake starts to jump when we move along that surface. Well, mainly because the technology was highly optimized for maps like Stalingrad and Normandy, which are quite flat. Let's say there are no super large elevation changes. This is mostly a mountainous landscape, and this will be with the next map too. If we deal with the Pacific there, we hope to deal with it. We have already approved plans. There are also huge islands, and they have mountain rivers. So this is all very important.
Yes, but we should also add about the water, although this has probably already been mentioned. But again, we can also relate this to the surface of the water. It has transparency now. Yes, so we see that.
So can we see about
if you
5
take
meters
into
deep?
account, let's say, the scattering and absorption of light, basically in clear seawater, you can see something down to about 15 meters. So submarines are visible at shallow depths.
And this is not just because of the submarines, although that is important. We will show screenshots. First of all, your ship looks much more natural because of the higher quality reflection systems.
Well,
and
yes,
this
it is better
transparency.
integrated into the
And
overall
the second
picture.
point, well, everyone remembers what a crashed plane looks like in great battles when it is in the water. It is just cut off by the water, and it looked completely unnatural. Also, if the pilot appeared and started swimming with only his head sticking out of the water, he wouldn't be visible, probably because his head is so small. This means that the body should also be partially visible underwater to make it look normal. We also made it so that when the pilot jumps out of the plane, he swims. And to make it all work visually, especially with the upcoming Pacific, it became an absolutely necessary feature, and so it was implemented.
Yes, you're right about that. Yeah, then, they also developed three-dimensional rails and railroad ties again, which is of course what is needed to properly build and depict a railroad on the map. So, well, at this point, this is specifically a discussion about the building of railroads itself on the map for Korea.
By the way, on this topic of railroads, this is a pretty heavy, big development. Yes, a lot of work has been done. It can also be damaged now, in the sense that a crater can be formed and a train can then crash into it. Yes, we had to consider the damage because it is vital for how we build bridges has changed. Again, in connection with this, there's also how the bridge connects. This is specifically graphical, meaning from a content perspective, it's changed. And why is that important? Well, in great battles, the train itself was a fairly simple model. It wasn't so obvious that the tracks were just painted on the ground. Now the train corresponds to the model of trains and all other objects in the game as expected for 2025. They are modern, high-quality, detailed models. If it was on flat tracks, it would be completely inappropriate. That's why we made the effort.
Yes, and while we are discussing the topic, it should also be noted that in addition to the three-dimensional models,
Now it
the
crashes
trains have
beautifully.
undergone a
It can be
change
rail
in their
now.
physical modeling.
Yes. By the way, let's note that the video where everybody was complaining about the train jumping, right? Well, there was something about the car jumping too much. Guys, well, you have to understand that it was a work in progress. Of course, the physics are being refined. You won't see that effect in the release, but even in the video, it wasn't that bad. On the contrary, I thought it was cool. Well, it jumped a bit, so
Yes, and again, with railroads, we have to note the importance of having power lines along the tracks. In this case, there are telegraph poles, I think, and light poles.
Something like that, yes.
Accordingly, all of this also takes into account the damage system in both multiplayer and single-player gameplay modes. Again, with these power line systems and like a telegraph on poles, again, the possibility of lighting with the same lighting system. That is, these poles can also illuminate roads. They will be visible at night on the roads. Not only railways, in principle a dirt road, whatever is needed, that's what it will be,
maybe build a
depending
road
on what
without
the artist
poles,
puts in
maybe
the
with
editor.
poles. And by the way, speaking of roads themselves, we should add something. In great battles, we always had only two kinds of roads, vehicle and
At the
railroad.
moment, yes, there is no strict type as such. There is the railroad and all the other road types. Yes, there are
Yes,
already...
I think there are already 5
Well,
or 6 of them.
Yeah, you're definitely right.
They also connect with each other.
I think that these materials and textures are applied to these roads. So, what else can be noted here? In connection, accordingly, with all of these changes regarding reflections and all of these elements accordingly, well, we again developed this new effect system. Yes, there is, well, it's really more of an evolutionary development here. So there's not really a revolution going on. But considering the need for better texturing and the fact that the particle and trail systems have improved, there are more textures now overall. Normal maps have come out, and everything's gotten a lot better in this regard.
Well, our previous effects system, it was made, roughly speaking, the last time we worked on it was in 2013. At the time of the release of Stalingrad, a set of effects was created, and since then it has been frozen because there was already a certain set of content created for Stalingrad, and in order to change something, everything had to be redone, all the effects, so it was not possible to work on it. One can't say that we are now cooler than Unreal in terms of effects on the one hand. On the other hand, one can't say that we're worse either because we now simply have a modern effects system that includes all the capabilities that all modern engines possess.
Well, you could say that, yes. What else? In terms of changes, yes, the vegetation systems have changed. We talked about this in the very beginning, in the first videos. But now we've come to the point where the system for displaying trees, forests, and grass has been reworked. Accordingly, again, PBR materials have been added to the vegetation itself, but honestly, I'm not sure that our artists fully use this system.
It will still be refined, but even in the current screenshots, we can already see a very significant difference in quality compared to what was in
Yes, but
Great
it should be
Battles.
noted that we are not making a Russian Soul simulator. It should be understood that vegetation is the most resource-intensive component in all games.
Of course.
Therefore, there is still a balance between performance and saturation of these polygons. Grass. The task is to make the grass different, to make the grass better, not to create a jungle for us.
By the way, the trees there not only have different materials, but also
Yes, regarding the lighting system, it was created
Yes,
with diffusion
there.
in the canopy of the trees. Yes. But that's kind of, well, let's just say, it is uniquely our own approach when it comes to the modeling of trees. Other games do things a little bit differently. For example, in shooter games, there is a lot of emphasis on regular shadow mapping, meaning regular shadows. They catch on. Since we have a simulator, our trees should cover very large areas, unlike shooters. And so far, we haven't completely moved away from imposters in trees, or rather billboards. But in principle, everything points to the fact that sooner or later we will replace, let's say, quickly renderable trees with three-dimensional trees. The question of when that will happen is still unclear.
It depends on the graphics cards, and right now this is one of the most powerful innovations. When somebody does this in a sim, not just us, everybody does it a little bit differently, of course. But this is one of the most powerful innovations in how to take a foreground tree that is three-dimensional, with branches, leaves, and seamlessly and imperceptibly transition it into a billboard that is just
The correct way to
described.
describe it is that it's an
Yes,
imposter. This is not a new concept. It's standard technology, just implemented with varying degrees of success everywhere. In Unity, it's not so good. Somewhere else, it might be better. It also depends on how the artist implements it. Even with good technology, it can be done badly. It also depends on the content, not just the technology.
And what's also cool is that, well, it's been like this for a long time, but it's still cool. Anyway, I think that we have those flat tree LODs. They're generated automatically.
Well, yes, again, there are different approaches. We chose this approach. Sometimes it's done differently, and sometimes it's just 3D with LODs.
All right, well, we told you about the features. Although, you know what I would add to this discussion that I think is important? This has more to do with the Game World engine than it does with the graphics engine. But if we talk about the damage of those same hidden and not just blocks. Importantly, along with this technology, we have also developed approaches to ensure that if you cause damage in a particular area of the map during a mission, that damage will be roughly reproduced in the next mission. Well, we've wanted to do it for a long time, but we didn't have the opportunity, and now in Korea such an opportunity has come up, and in terms of the career mode, it's certainly going to add quite a bit of immersion. That's the comment I wanted to add. But let's move on to the questions, because it's been almost 20 minutes. Here are the questions that came in. Let's start with the tricky ones. The first two, for sure. Right on target. Hello. Considering the technological progress of Korea, how much will the demand on gaming hardware increase?
Well, the hardware requirements are gradually increasing, with all projects that aren't in some sort of state of stagnation.
But it would be strange to expect that a game from the year 2025 will have the same requirements as a game from 2014.
Yes, but we expect that by the time of release, the standard hardware requirements for the game will be average for the market. Because of that, we are not setting any ambitious mega system requirements at the moment. However, everything can still change because the second question is related to this.
But basically, in principle, we have always adhered to this, that is, since ancient times, at the time of release. Initially, the base game was Rise of Flight in 2009, then it was Stalingrad in 2014, and now it is, accordingly, Korea in 2025. At the time of the game's release, the minimum system requirements for the video card are 2 generations behind the current, latest generation. That is to say, roughly speaking, in the case of Korea, it will be an NVIDIA 3060 most likely. But we'll see. But, in theory, a 3060 on medium settings will allow you to quite easily, to play Korea. At least right now, at this moment, a bunch of people in the office are using a 3060, and on medium settings, everything is basically playable for everyone. That's it. Next question. And on a 1060 you will probably not have enough memory with that type of card. All right. Second question. Hello, everyone. My question might be inappropriate. Interesting? Since there is a direct comparison, will you be able to compete with Digital Combat Simulator specifically regarding the visualization of atmosphere, haze, and fog
right
effects?
Now, we can't really compete with DCS because of the specifics of our project, meaning the setting, and as we know, DCS likes to put a strong emphasis on. Look, in Digital Combat Simulator, there is a big emphasis there on dust storms, on desert maps. We obviously don't have that with our maps right now.
Well, we don't have a desert.
So talking about competing, how to compete. We don't have dust, we can't show it. There simply wasn't any, like in the Pacific. Well, unless there's a storm or something. So we can't fully compete here right now because we haven't entered the Middle Eastern region yet. As far as maps go, I don't know if it's planned.
Well, are you talking about that last video, right? Where everything is shooting and... Yes, the question is probably about that promo video. By the way, yes. So,
that's why we can't fully compete, because we are not given such tasks. Well, naturally, there is haze and there is mist. All of that exists. But obviously, it depends on what kind of this person means specifically.
I would say overall that everyone's technology is basically the same.
They are roughly the same. Yes, there are slight differences. Well, for example, we are currently working on options for atmospheric shadows, but this relates more to haze and fog rather than dust storms. Atmospheric shadows. And well, this is not so much about the shadows themselves in the atmosphere, but rather that in most projects, the same in MSFS and the same in DCS, at least for now, have a lot of problems when, so to speak, looking at the sun through obstacles, through mountains, for example. Yes, through the clouds, and we actually see the sun halo looking through the mountains. This problem exists everywhere. We are currently looking for a solution. Basically, a solution for the landscape has been found. It's more complicated with clouds. Maybe we will...
So, what Sergey is talking about here is how this problem is especially noticeable during the times of sunset and sunrise.
Yes, not just then, but generally after 5 p.m. it's already visible.
Mountainous landscapes as well. This technology with physical atmospheric ray tracing is used everywhere, in DCS, in MSFS, and in Korea now. It wasn't in great battles. It produces some artifacts. You might see stripes against the mountains, things like that. And this is partly due to this. And perhaps, if DCS does not do it for the remaining part of 2025, this might be where we do better.
We'll be better. Well, maybe they're doing it right now. We don't know.
Everything there is
Everything is kind of a mystery there.
Basically, the atmosphere is approximately at the same level for everyone now. More or less, it's not possible to say that someone has advanced ahead. Number, this technology was initially developed at MSFS, I think.
Oh no, it was actually invented way before
Implemented.
they applied it. They started using it. No, wait, I think still DCS. I think they
I
were the
remember
first.
it appeared in Microsoft
It was
Flight
definitely
Simulator
there from the
2020.
very start in MSFS. As for what was before, I don't follow DCS. So who came first? I don't really know. There are other projects, but they can of course be done differently. And by the way, in some cases, artists prefer a non-physical atmosphere, but not quite. Because it's difficult to figure out how to set this up.
How do you adjust to
Because
work
you're not
with
just
this?
drawing a texture
Because you're
here,
not
you're
just drawing
configuring it,
textures
sorry.
here. You're adjusting, some kind of ozone content coefficients
Naturally,
to
to
achieve the
achieve-
desired sunset sky
For
color, for
example,
example.
I know for sure that recently MSFS boasted about including light scattering in the atmosphere and sky in their model, including the ozone layer. It's strange why they didn't have this initially. It's actually a small addition, just one more layer. But for some reason, they managed to do it last year. I heard
We
the
have done it
news.
internally in a
Look,
prototype
you have great
as far
battles.
as 2.5 years
the
ago.
sky, it basically already works on this technology. It already has this. In great battles, the sky, it's already correct there.
Oh, it's the sky.
That is,
the sky
if we are
dome.
talking specifically about ozone, it's about the sky dome, about the color of the sky. And ozone...
Oh, ozone, it just adds a little purple to the sunset.
Yes, it removes the green tints of the sky that would be there if there were no ozone. Well, if somehow the ozone disappears from Earth, we will see a different sky.
Let's just enjoy it and then die.
Well, probably not everyone.
All right, I think that's enough. Let's move on to the next question. Will civilian traffic be implemented, and how will the player be able to interact with people? People probably mean what we talked about earlier, that civilians will be walking around our cities.
Civilians are walking around now. We have real ones, meaning they have an AI. As for the city traffic, well, of course you can do this sort of thing. But the question is whether there will be free computing resources in the game specifically for this. Because it puts a small load on graphics, but more so on the network. It all depends on how realistic this traffic will be. Should we follow the traffic rules or what? Everything depends on that. If we follow the traffic rules there, consider it as another simulator within a simulator. So it depends on the level of detail in the implementation and what we want to achieve. But for now, we have enough tasks without this.
Yes, I would add this. To do it well, we need, there are a few points. Apart from what Sergey mentioned, firstly, online, if you destroy a car, it should be transmitted to other players. And if you destroy many, then what will happen? All this needs to be resolved. Then the second point, if the road is occupied by civilian traffic, then it must somehow interact with those columns that are in the mission scenario. And one should not interfere with the other. The mission script must be carried out, and then some crazy tractor will be driving and tanks will be crashing into it. Well, it's something that needs to be worked out. It's not as simple as it seems. So, for example, it's fine if the movement is two-way, but what if the road is narrow and with one-way traffic? How will they behave
They
there?
will have to
Somehow
evade
it
each
must be
other.
held together. Yes, that is, en masse there. What if you're on a bridge? They will meet, and that's it. Mission over. They met on the bridge, and that's it. It's not as simple as it seems. There are a whole series of questions that need to be addressed. The main point is to create a realistic traffic flow on the roads. During the war in Korea, the traffic was more than halfway or even 2/3 or 3/4 composed of horse-drawn transport and people with packs. And cars there were more of an exception than a rule in Korea for the most part. Therefore, how much it is needed specifically in the context of Korea is a question. On the other hand, it is about freight transport, some horse wandering along the roadsides. One could talk about something like that. In terms of Korea, we have a unique setting due to the historical context. But that's all after the release. We didn't actually plan to work on this feature by the release. We still need to see what the performance will be like at the time of release, considering all the features we are already working on. The next question is amusing. I left it in just because, guys, look what you already have in terms of great battles. There's a lot of good stuff. The question is this: will the position of stars in the sky be taken into account? Will they move according to the seasons? Can you use them for navigation?
Well, this system has been working since Rise of Flight. I just don't know, here we have complaints about Betelgeuse. I think it's missing. Yes, we don't have Betelgeuse, but everything else is there, thank God. And there are no complaints. Strange question. It feels like the person just didn't launch the game and didn't look at the sky.
Oh yes, we have a starry sky fully reproduced. In Korea, we specifically worked to make it look a bit better, with contrast and
There's just
star
a little
halo.
touch-up applied.
Touch-up has been done? Yes, a touch-up has been done. So, a question about Betelgeuse, which has somehow been bothering our community for many years. Well, guys, I get that Betelgeuse is a famous star. It's about to explode and may affect our world. It's a star, yeah, but like no one uses it for navigation. They mostly use other stars. Let this defect stay with us a little longer. All right, then. And the final question for today, Sergey, is of a personal nature. Were there any truly interesting moments or bugs during development that you personally found extremely interesting, which you had to deal with, that presented such a professional? The question is specifically about bugs. They ask if there have been any interesting bugs. Well, actually, he didn't mean that if you read the context, because he writes about technologies further. He writes in English. Have there been any really interesting or amusing bugs when developing with new technologies? Any favorites? So, any memorable moments in development, so to speak?
All right, well, the memorable moment I have here has to do with bugs. I can say
do explain.
there was such an interesting bug that it allowed us to improve our technology. This was, accordingly, when we were developing a new cloud system. Let's say there was a bug, but it was not our bug. It was a bug related to the features of the Microsoft compiler, HLSL, shading language, which resulted in clouds looking better. Imagine that, meaning they looked better with this bug than without it. In the end, there was such good lighting from below, extra volume was added, and additional volume was given to the clouds. But in the end, a 2-week project was carried out to research what this bug does to the code, to reproduce it without the bug. And in the end, it was determined what it was doing, this compiler. In the end, we removed this bug but made a slightly different effect, the same. This is exactly about what the clouds are illuminated not only from above, but they also have a bit of volume on the shadow side. That is, if, let's say, overcast, then the shape of the clouds, it depends on the artist's settings, it can be a little embossed. Initially, at the very beginning, the relief was given by this compiler shader bug. But we removed this bug and kept the effect for ourselves, so to speak.
By the way, I didn't know that. I think it's a cool story. I should remember it and tell it every time. Thank you very much. We must get together again since we still have other topics to discuss. We ask everyone to subscribe to our channel if you're interested in what we're talking about. Ask questions. We regularly post surveys on our social networks so you can ask these kinds of questions for these meetings, and we try to answer them. Please try to ask questions on the topic because, for instance, the questions we addressed today were relevant to the topic. There were also twice as many questions that were not relevant to the topic. Time is limited, and we answer only on-topic questions. Sorry. And definitely, please, leave us likes on our videos. Goodbye, everyone. See you next time. Bye now.